I will never forget that cruise. It was a regular vacation, and I was looking forward to relaxing and enjoying the sea. We boarded the ship in Barcelona and planned to spend 2 weeks traveling around the Mediterranean Sea. The ship had everything you could want: restaurants, pools, casinos, and evening shows. The first day went without incident. We sailed out of the harbor and enjoyed the views and services on board. I met a few people and even made a couple buddies to spend time with. On the third day, something started to feel strange. In the morning, I noticed that one of the passengers, an elderly woman, was missing. Her belongings were left in her cabin, but she was nowhere to be found. Everyone thought she had just stayed on deck somewhere, enjoying the view. But the evening brought terrible news. She had never been found. The staff started asking everyone who had seen her, but no one could remember anything out of the ordinary. The next morning, another passenger disappeared, a young man with whom I had played poker several times. I began to feel strangely uneasy. The ship was full of people, but everyone began to notice strange disappearances. Every morning, someone was missing, and no one could explain what was going on. The captain and crew tried to calm us down, assuring us that everything was under control, but I could see how panicked they were themselves. On the 6th day, the couple I had seen at dinner disappeared. It was becoming impossible to ignore. People began to panic, many locking themselves in their cabins and refusing to leave. An atmosphere of fear began to prevail on the ship. I tried to stay close to my new friends, but no one felt safe. On the 7th day, I woke up to screaming. It turned out that someone had found blood on the deck. I went there and saw a huge pool of blood, but no bodies. Panic was growing. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing: I didn't want to be next. I decided to take action. I hardly slept that night, listening for every rustle. I was ready to be taken away. And then, at about 3 a.m, I heard a low whisper outside my cabin door. I froze, my heart pounding frantically. The whisper grew louder. I realized it was words. Someone was repeating my name. I grabbed the heavy lamp off the nightstand and walked to the door. The whispering didn't stop. I opened the door abruptly and saw a dark figure in the hallway. At that moment, I hit the lamp as hard as I could. The figure collapsed to the floor, and I saw that it was one of the crew. He was lying unconscious. It was quiet all around. Only my heavy breathing could be heard. Not knowing what to do next, I decided to check his pockets. I found keys and some papers. Among them was a map of the ship with the cabins marked. I noticed that my cabin was marked for tonight. Realizing that I was in the middle of some sinister game, I felt a wave of terror. Realizing that my life was in danger, I decided that I had to act quickly. First of all, I dragged the unconscious crewman to my quarters and locked him there so that no one could find him and free him. I studied the map. It was detailed and clearly intended for internal use. Numerous red marks indicated the cabins where passengers had disappeared. These marks led to some room at the very bottom of the ship, in a service area where passengers were not allowed to enter. I decided to go there, hoping to find out more about what was going on. Using the keys I'd found, I crept quietly through the corridors. My heart was racing as I moved down the stairs, trying not to make a sound. There was almost no one on the lower decks. Everything was plunged into darkness. Reaching the locked door, I found the right key and carefully opened it. It was dark inside, and I fumbled for the light switch. The light illuminated a small room with a large metal table in the center. On the walls hung strange instruments that looked like medical instruments, but the judgment of them was not trustworthy. On the table were papers and pictures of the missing passengers. I started leafing through the papers and realized with horror that they were records of some kind of medical experiments. Apparently, these people had been kidnapped for some terrible purpose. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the door. Realizing there was no time, I grabbed some documents and hid behind a cabinet in the corner of the room. The door opened and two men in white coats walked in. They were discussing something among themselves, but their conversation was unclear to me because of the sound of the refrigerator running. One of them came to the table and started writing something down in a journal. The other was inspecting the equipment. I had to stand still so as not to give away my presence. When they finally left, I quickly left the room and headed back to my quarters. On the way, I tried to avoid seeing anyone so as not to attract attention. When I returned to my quarters, I found that a crewman had regained consciousness and was trying to get out. I tied him up and began asking him questions. He refused to talk at first, but apparently realizing the seriousness of my intention, he began to reveal himself. It turned out that a group of people were operating on the ship, conducting illegal medical experiments on the passengers. They were kidnapping people and taking them to their laboratory on the lower deck. This information shocked me. I realized that I had to do something to stop them and save the remaining passengers, but acting alone was too dangerous. I decided to find my friends and work out a plan of action together. I went to the quarters of my new friends, starting with Mark, with whom I often had dinner. Knocking softly, I heard him walk cautiously to the door. He opened it, and when he saw me, he sighed with relief. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, stepping inside. I had learned something terrible. We sat down at a small table in his quarters, and I told him everything I'd learned. He was shocked, but understood the gravity of the situation. We decided that we needed to gather our other friends and make a plan. Lisa and her husband John's cabin was next. They were horrified to learn of our findings, but agreed to help. We went to the last member of our group, Emily. She was a photo reporter and could probably help us gather evidence. After gathering in my quarters, we began to discuss the plan. I showed them the documents I had found, and we all agreed that we needed to act quickly. We decided that Mark and John would keep an eye on the crew's movements, while Lisa and I searched for more evidence. Emily would take her camera with her and try to capture what was happening on the lower deck. That night, we sprang into action. Mark and John took up positions near the stairs, leading down to warn us if anyone from the crew was approaching. Me, Lisa, and Emily headed downstairs, using the map to avoid cameras and guards. When we got to the lab, I used the keys to open the door. We went inside, and Emily immediately started taking pictures. We found additional documents proving illegal experiments. Everything indicated that people were being used for some kind of medical tests, the results of which no one knew about. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside the door. This was not part of the plan. I quickly hid behind the desk. Lisa and Emily took cover behind the cabinets. The door opened and two men walked in. They were talking amongst themselves, discussing that there would be more experiments the next night. They quickly left the room, and we came out of our hiding places. Time was running out, and we decided that we had to act now. We went back to our friends and told them what was happening. It was decided that we would try to capture someone who was directing these horrors and get them to talk on camera. The next day, we noticed that one of the doctors was walking the decks a lot, so we decided to ambush him. After making preparations, we waited for the right moment. When he was on the deserted deck, we surrounded him and captured him. He tried to resist, but our numerical advantages did the trick. Locking him in his quarters, we began the interrogation. He refused to talk at first, but under pressure he began to reveal information. It turned out that what was going on was part of a vast conspiracy. The experiments were funded by a big pharmaceutical company, and many of the crew were involved. They were kidnapping people and running horrible tests on them, hoping to find cures for incurable diseases. We recorded his confessions on camera. Now we had proof. The problem, however, was how to get off the ship and give this information to the authorities. The ship was at sea, and the nearest port was days away. We stayed up all the next night, thinking about how to avoid detection and get the truth to the authorities. The next morning, we decided that we needed to get as many passengers on our side as possible. We started approaching people we trusted and telling them the truth, showing them records and documents. To our surprise, many of them began to organize, realizing that our lives were indeed in danger. We knew that the ship's leadership would soon notice our actions, so we had to act quickly. We devised a plan to take over the captain's bridge so we could use radio communications to call for help. When evening came, we gathered on the upper deck, not far from the captain's bridge. The plan was simple. We split into two groups. One group was to distract the crew, while the other group infiltrated the bridge and took over the controls. Mark, Lisa, and a few other passengers started making noise and putting up a fake fight on deck. Soon crew members came running up to them to sort things out. Meanwhile, myself, John, Emily, and a few others quietly made our way to the captain's bridge. Using the keys we found, we opened the door and went inside. There were several people on the bridge, including the captain. We quickly disarmed them and locked them in one of the service rooms. John sat down at the radio station and began transmitting a distress call. He described our situation in detail and asked for urgent help. The response came within minutes. We were informed that the nearest warship was already on its way to us. This gave us hope, but we realized that help would not arrive for several hours at the earliest. We fortified our positions on the bridge and prepared for a possible attack from the remaining crew members. Down below, the passengers continued to distract the crew, but it became obvious that they would soon realize what was happening. The wait was agonizing. Every sound seemed to be a harbinger of danger. We didn't know how many other crew members were involved in these horrors, or how far they were willing to go to hide the truth. Suddenly, we heard gunshots from below. This meant that the crew had sprung into action. Our friends who were defending the deck were screaming and trying to hold their positions. We realized that there was less and less time left. Soon, the silhouette of a warship appeared on the horizon. Its approach gave us hope. We knew we had to hold on a little longer. As the warship got closer, they used a loudspeaker to contact us. We informed them of the situation and asked for immediate help. A few minutes later, armed soldiers began to board our ship. They quickly took control of the situation, arresting all involved crew members. The captain and his underlings were captured and handcuffed. the passengers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. We handed over the evidence we had collected to the military. They thanked us for our courage and promised that the guilty would be punished with the punishment they deserved. We were exhausted, but glad it was over. At the next stop, we were dropped off and taken to the shore, where the authorities and journalists were waiting for us. The story of the sinister experiments on the cruise ship had become a sensation. We testified and provided all the materials we had collected. That cruise changed my life forever. I realized that sometimes the truth requires incredible courage and determination